At least 15,000 people have died and hundreds of thousands have been infected by COVID-19, the respiratory virus which emerged in China late last year. In response, the European Union has shut its external borders, while rising numbers of countries like the United States have imposed travel bans.
To keep new cases from entering our shores, we will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days.
Countries like Israel and China have been ramping up the surveillance of citizens using artificial intelligence and tracking technology to help monitor the virus. It's also led to some countries like Malaysia and India to crack down on free speech, which experts say could prevent essential communication about the disease. Now digital rights experts are asking, will these controls go away after coronavirus? Or are they here to stay? Before we can explore this question, we have to look at why these controls were implemented in the first place and what they set out to achieve. Let's start with Singapore. In January, more than 100 people from around the world gathered in the 5-star Grand Hyatt Hotel for a sales conference. After they had all left, it emerged that one of the participants was infected with coronavirus. From then, it was a race against time to track the attendees who had travelled within Singapore or flown home, potentially spreading the virus to places it hadn't reached yet. In a Facebook post, the Prime Minister said the government was starting a process called contact tracing. This involves creating a log of a patient's movements and interactions in the 14 days before their admission to hospital, and tracing everyone exposed to them. Under normal circumstances, a government tracking your location for 2 weeks could be seen as a blatant breach of privacy, but proponents say it becomes necessary to combat the spread of an infectious disease. Now, these sorts of measures are nothing new. Governments around the world have been giving themselves emergency powers to deal with crises for centuries, but the exceptional measures they enact don't always go away once the crisis is over. Take income tax, for example. Modern income tax started out in Britain in 1799 during a time of national crisis, the French Revolutionary War. It was meant to help Britain pay for things like weapons and equipment. When the war ended, it was halted, but enforced again when hostilities flared up or the government was short on cash, before finally becoming permanent in the mid-1800s. Now income tax is the norm all around the world.
National security, times of crises, is one of the big exemptions, and that's where everything tends to go out of the window in order to respond to the crisis. What we're seeing with the current COVID-19 epidemic is a degree to which, as societies, we don't plan well for systemic risk. We don't plan well for collective risk. We plan for individual risk and individual benefit.
Emergency measures being taken by countries to combat coronavirus are going beyond contact tracing. In Israel, the government approved the use of tracking technology for at least 30 days to retrace the movements of infected patients. In Russia, they're using facial recognition to make sure people who have been ordered to stay at home are following these orders. It's been reported that the US government is in talks with tech companies to explore ways they can use location data on citizens' phones to help track the spread of the virus. And in China, AI and security camera companies have been touting systems which they say can recognize faces, even if people are wearing masks or hats, and report them to authorities. So, what happens after the emergency's over and countries are left with large surveillance mechanisms in place?
The moment that you have a leader that is less scrupulous than the other one, you can just flip the switch and to try and use that data in ways that may not be acceptable to society. We are making societal trade-offs. We're making political decisions in times of crises that have nothing to do with the crisis itself, but may come to haunt us in the future.
But this isn't the first time we've seen an increase in surveillance. After almost 3,000 people were killed in a series of terrorist attacks in the United States on September the 11th, 2001, Congress passed legislation to strengthen national security. They called it the USA Patriot Act. The act introduced a host of new measures, like allowing law enforcement to use surveillance and wiretapping, and giving federal agents access to bank and business records to investigate terror-related crimes. Civil rights groups claimed it infringed constitutional rights, for example the Fourth Amendment, which states the protection against unlawful searches and seizures. When the act was due to expire in 2005, lawmakers debated whether it should be renewed, and whether it did indeed help prevent terrorism. Despite these concerns, President Bush signed the USA Patriot and Terrorism Reauthorization Act on March 9, 2006. It wasn't until 2015, almost 14 years after its original signing, that parts of it were repealed when President Obama signed the Freedom Act into law, which restored and modified provisions of the Patriot Act, and put significant restrictions on how surveillance programs could be used. Today, some of the most obvious examples of high-tech social controls are in China, where people are required to use software on their smartphones that determines whether they should be quarantined or can be allowed into public spaces. Chinese censorship of social media is nothing new, but other countries are using the outbreak to impose stricter information controls on their citizens too. At least 5 people were arrested and released on bail in Kerala, India, over WhatsApp messages, while at least 9 people have been fined in Vietnam over posts about coronavirus.
It's a hop, skip and a jump until you get to a more Chinese-style surveillance system, which is platform to platform, meaning that it's not just about a CCTV surveillance which is looking at you. It has the ability to follow you from a shop, through a public park, into another private shop, and then as you get into your home. And I think that the implications of that are very, very far-reaching.
Many of the responses to coronavirus are necessary, governments say. Techniques like contact tracing can save lives and help countries develop strategies to slow the spread of a disease. But as infections grow and new powers are given to governments to combat them, privacy experts warn that strong data protection laws and independent authorities to uphold them are more necessary than ever to protect the rights of citizens.